The rain had been falling for hours, thick, heavy droplets that soaked through the thin layers of Jamal Carter's hoodie and made the cracked sidewalks of Bourbon Street glisten like broken mirrors. It was the kind of storm that clung to your skin and seeped into your bones, a cold that didn't just chill your body, but reached into your soul, reminding you just how small you were in the grand scheme of things. Jamal sat hunched under the overhang of an old, boarded-up cafe, its faded sign, Sweet Magnolia's Coffee and Pie, barely visible through the grime and peeling paint. He watched the world go by in streaks of color and sound, the flickering neon of the bars, the muffled jazz spilling from open windows, the laughter and shouts of people who walked past without even glancing his way. To most of them, Jamal wasn't even a person. Just another homeless black man blending into the city's forgotten corners, a shadow on the sidewalk, a problem to be ignored, a story no one cared to hear. He had learned not to take it personally. Life had a way of teaching you hard lessons, and for Jamal, the biggest one was that the world owed you nothing. His stomach growled, sharp and insistent, like a knife twisting deep inside him. It had been nearly 2 days since he'd eaten anything more than scraps from a trash bin behind a gas station. His hands, calloused and cracked, gripped the edges of the damp cardboard sign on his lap. The words, "Just need a little help, God bless you," were written in marker that had started to smudge from the rain. He felt invisible. Until she stopped. At first, he barely noticed her, a small figure wrapped in an oversized denim jacket, her blonde hair damp and tangled beneath the hood. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her eyes scanning the street like she was looking for something, or someone. Her jeans were torn at the knees, her shoes scuffed and mismatched. She didn't look like she had much to give. Jamal watched her warily. Experience had taught him that most people didn't stop for folks like him unless they wanted to yell, preach, or worse. He kept his gaze low, expecting her to move on. But instead, she hesitated. Her name, though he didn't know it yet, was Emily Parker. She was 29, from a small town in Alabama, and had come to New Orleans chasing a dream that had shattered into 1,000 pieces the moment her job fell through and her rent skyrocketed. She had been living on the streets for months, her life unraveling in slow, painful fragments. But none of that mattered in that moment, not her past, not her present. What mattered was the way she looked at Jamal. Not with pity. Not with fear. But with something else, something like understanding. Emily reached into her battered backpack, her fingers trembling slightly, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. It wasn't much, just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the edges a little soggy from the rain. But to Jamal, it looked like a feast. Then, she dug a little deeper and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, her knuckles pale from the grip. I don't have much," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I know what it's like. When nobody sees you." For a moment, the noise of the street seemed to fade, the honking horns, the footsteps, the rain pounding on the sidewalk. All Jamal could hear was the sound of her voice, soft and hesitant, and the rapid beating of his own heart. He stared at the sandwich in her outstretched hand, then at the $5 bill, unsure whether to accept it. His pride screamed at him to refuse. He had always been the one who gave, back when things were better, before the layoffs, before the eviction, before the night spent under the stars because there was nowhere else to go. But hunger was louder than pride. His fingers closed around the sandwich, the paper cool and damp against his skin. Emily pressed the money into his hand, her eyes locking onto his. "Pay it forward someday," she said softly, almost like a prayer. "If you can." Jamal nodded, his throat tight, unable to form words. Emily gave him a small, almost apologetic smile, then turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the rain like a ghost. He sat there for a long time, the sandwich growing heavier in his lap, the $5 bill crumpled in his hand. It wasn't just the food. It was what it represented, someone seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time in what felt like forever. He thought about chasing after her, asking her name, maybe even giving her back the money. But his legs felt heavy, like they were glued to the pavement. And so he sat in the rain, the cold seeping into his bones, the sandwich warming his hands, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in months, Jamal felt something stir inside him, something like hope. He would never forget her. And as the rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, Jamal made himself a silent promise. If he ever got the chance, if life ever turned around, he would pay it forward. He would find her. And he would make sure she knew that her kindness had not been in vain. The city had a way of swallowing people whole, of chewing them up in its hungry, neon-lit mouth and spitting them back out in the dark alleys and forgotten corners. For Jamal Carter, those streets were both a cage and a crucible. That rainy night, the one when Emily Parker had handed him the soggy sandwich and crumpled $5 bill, became a pivot point in Jamal's mind. For days afterward, he replayed the moment over and over like a scratched record stuck on a single, haunting verse. The way her eyes had softened when they met his. The tremble in her hands as she'd passed him the food. The weight of her words, pay it forward someday. If you can. He hadn't eaten the sandwich right away. He'd held onto it like a relic, like a sacred object that carried more than just calories, it carried dignity. Hope. For the first time in months, Jamal felt like maybe, just maybe, he was more than the sum of his mistakes. But survival didn't wait for sentiment. Over the next few weeks, Jamal hustled harder than ever. He took odd jobs when he could, helping a mechanic haul tires, cleaning tables at a diner for leftover scraps, unloading boxes at a warehouse for a few bucks under the table. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even steady. But every dollar mattered. And every time he felt like giving up, when his body ached, when his stomach gnawed at itself, when the weight of the world pressed down like a lead blanket, he thought of her. Of Emily. The girl with the sandwich. She became a lighthouse in the fog, her kindness a flickering beacon that kept him moving forward. Months crawled by. Winter bled into spring, and Jamal's life began, slowly and almost imperceptibly, to change. He found a spot at a local shelter that offered him a cot in exchange for sweeping floors and washing dishes. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a place to rest without fear of being robbed, a warm meal at least once a day. One morning, while scrubbing grease off a skillet in the shelter's kitchen, Jamal overheard a conversation that changed everything. Construction site on 5th and Orleans is hiring, an older man said, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. They need strong backs, no questions asked. Pays cash at the end of the week. Jamal's pulse spiked. That night, he lay awake on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, a plan forming in his mind. He could take the job, save every penny, and maybe, just maybe, start fresh. Get off the streets for good. And maybe, if the universe allowed, find the girl who had seen him when no one else did. He showed up at the construction site the next morning before the sun had even risen, his hoodie still damp from the morning dew. The foreman, a burly man named Rick Stanton with a sunburned neck and a booming voice, eyed him skeptically. You ever done this kind of work before? Rick asked, his arms crossed over his chest. Jamal hesitated. Not exactly, he admitted, but I'm strong, and I learn fast. Rick snorted but, after a beat, jerked his head toward a stack of lumber. Fine. Prove it. Haul those boards over to the site. We'll see if you've got what it takes. The work was brutal. Jamal's muscles screamed, his hands blistered, and the sweat poured down his face in rivers. But he didn't stop. Not once. Because every splinter, every ache, was a step toward something better. By the end of the week, he had $200 in his pocket, more money than he'd held in months. It wasn't a fortune. But it was a seed. And Jamal knew seeds could grow if you tended them right. He kept at it. Week after week. Rain or shine. As the months ticked by, Jamal saved every dollar he could. He bought a pair of sturdy boots from a thrift store when his sneakers gave out. He found a room to rent, a tiny, peeling studio above a laundromat, but it had a lock on the door and a window that let in the morning light. He started to remember what it felt like to dream. And all the while, in the back of his mind, was Emily. Where was she now? Was she still out there, lost in the city's shadows, just like he had been? Or had she drifted away, swallowed by the same tides that almost drowned him? Jamal asked around when he could. Described her to the regulars at the soup kitchen, the denim jacket, the blonde hair, the mismatched shoes. Most people just shrugged. Lots of folks out there like that, one man said, his voice weary. They come and go. The city eats them alive. But Jamal wouldn't accept that. He owed her more than that. He owed her everything. And as the first anniversary of that rainy night approached, a year since the sandwich, the $5 bill, and the spark of hope that had reignited in his chest, Jamal knew what he had to do. He had to find her. No matter what it took. And when he did, when he finally looked her in the eyes again, he would pay her back. Threefold. It was a promise he had made in the depths of his soul. And Jamal Carter was a man who kept his promises. Jamal Carter had never been the type to believe in destiny. But as the anniversary of that rainy night approached, something stirred inside him, a pull he couldn't ignore. He thought about Emily constantly. It wasn't romantic, exactly. It was something deeper, more profound. She had been a light in his darkest hour, a stranger who had given without expecting anything in return. And now, a year later, Jamal had built a life, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, day by day. He had to find her. He had to repay that act of kindness, not just for her, but for himself. It was as if he couldn't fully move forward until he did. So he started his search. Every free moment, every spare breath outside of the construction site, Jamal walked the streets. He retraced the paths he used to take when he was homeless, the benches he used to sleep on, the corners where the forgotten gathered. He asked around at shelters, soup kitchens, even the bus station where the night buses hummed like a lullaby for the lost. Blonde girl, he'd say. Maybe early 30s. Denim jacket, always looked a little cold, you know. Some people shook their heads. Others frowned, as if trying to remember. A man named Tommy Two Toes Wallace, who ran a sort of unofficial network of information among the homeless community, listened to Jamal's description and scratched his chin. Blonde girl, huh? Might have seen her a few weeks back over by the old church on Maple. Could be her. Jamal's heart raced. He thanked Tommy and sprinted down Maple Avenue, his boots pounding the cracked sidewalk. The old church was a crumbling relic, its steeple tilting precariously like a drunk trying to stand. He searched the area, calling her name in his mind, Emily. Emily Parker. But no luck. Days turned into weeks. Jamal's search became an obsession. He scoured parks, underpasses, and alleyways. He asked everyone he met. He even put up a few flyers, looking for Emily. Blonde hair, denim jacket, kind heart. Nothing. And then, just as he began to lose hope, the universe answered. It was a chilly October evening when Jamal spotted her, sitting cross-legged on a piece of cardboard outside a boarded-up cafe. The wind tugged at her hair, which was now matted and dirty, but it was her. The denim jacket hung off her thin frame like a memory. His breath caught in his throat. She looked worse than he remembered, pale, gaunt, eyes hollowed by fatigue. A small, battered cup sat in front of her, with only a few coins inside. Jamal's hands trembled as he approached. Emily. She looked up, blinking as if she were seeing a ghost. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize him. Then her eyes widened. Jamal. Her voice cracked like dry leaves underfoot. Tears pricked his eyes. It's me. I've been looking for you. Emily's lips trembled, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other, two souls connected by a thread neither of them could explain. Jamal crouched down, reaching into his pocket. Wait here, he said. He dashed across the street to a diner and returned with a steaming cup of coffee and a sandwich. As she ate, he told her everything, how he'd taken that construction job, how he'd gotten a place to stay, how he had saved every penny he could. And then he did what he had promised himself he would do for a year. He pulled out a thick envelope, one he had been building for months. Inside was $1,500 in cash. His entire savings. Emily's eyes widened as he placed it in her trembling hands. Jamal. I can't. You can. You will, he said firmly. You helped me when no one else would. This is yours. Tears streamed down her face. But this is too much, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, Emily. It's not enough. I told you. I'd pay it back. 3 times over. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. Jamal sat beside her, the two of them wrapped in a silence that felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the moment, about proving that in a world full of cruelty, kindness still mattered. And Jamal knew, deep in his bones, that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Emily Parker sat on the cold sidewalk, staring at the envelope of cash in her lap like it was a mirage, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold it. Jamal sat beside her, quietly watching the city lights flicker to life as the sun sank behind the skyline. The sounds of the street filled the air, distant sirens, the rhythmic thump of tires on asphalt, the faint chatter of people passing by. But in that moment, none of it mattered. It was just them. I can't take this, Emily whispered again, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks. Her voice cracked with a mix of disbelief and shame. You can. And you will, Jamal said softly but firmly. His tone left no room for argument. I didn't do anything to deserve this. Yes, you did. You gave me hope when I had none. That's worth more than any dollar. Emily's shoulders shook as she wept, and Jamal placed a gentle hand on hers, grounding her as she processed the weight of what was happening. They sat like that for what felt like forever, until Emily finally took a shaky breath and asked, "What do I do now?" Jamal smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. You start over. The first steps. The next few days were a blur. Jamal helped Emily find a room at a women's shelter, a small, shared space, but a roof nonetheless. He made calls, connected her with Sister Margaret, a no-nonsense nun who ran a local soup kitchen and outreach program. Emily got clean clothes, a hot meal, and even a haircut thanks to a volunteer named Marcy, a retired stylist who donated her time. Bit by bit, she started to look less like a shadow and more like the woman Jamal remembered, though the haunted look in her eyes lingered. Over cups of coffee and shared sandwiches, they talked. Emily told him about the man who'd broken her spirit, a boyfriend named Travis, who had promised her the world, then dragged her into a spiral of addiction and abuse. How she'd ended up on the streets, too ashamed to call her family, too lost to find her way back. Jamal listened, his heart heavy with empathy. And in return, he shared his own story. How he'd grown up in East Baltimore, the son of a janitor and a grocery store cashier. How he dropped out of college when his mother got sick. How he'd lost his job during the pandemic, and with it, his apartment. I thought I was worthless, he admitted one night, staring at the flickering neon sign outside the diner where they Saturday, I thought I'd die on those streets. Emily reached across the table and took his hand. Me too, she whispered. In that moment, they weren't just a black man and a white woman. They weren't just two former strangers. They were survivors, bound by the invisible threads of compassion and struggle. The ripple effect. As the weeks passed, Jamal watched Emily transform. She got a part-time job at a thrift store, sorting donations. She started attending group therapy. And then, something unexpected happened. Emily decided to find her family. I need to make it right, she told Jamal one evening, her voice filled with both fear and resolve. I need to see my mom. Jamal offered to drive her. The reunion wasn't easy. Emily's mother, Diane Parker, lived in a modest home in the suburbs. When Emily knocked on her door, Diane froze in shock. Tears welled in her eyes as she took in her daughter's gaunt frame, the lines of hardship etched into her face. It took hours, hours of apologies, confessions, and raw, gut-wrenching truths. But by the end, Diane opened her arms, and Emily collapsed into them, sobbing. Jamal watched from the porch, feeling something in his chest shift. It wasn't just Emily's life he had helped change. It was an entire family's. The twist. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One evening, as Jamal was leaving his construction site, a black SUV pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down, revealing a man in a sharp suit, Detective Ray Collins. Jamal Carter. Yeah, that's me, Jamal said, frowning. We need to talk. Jamal's stomach sank. What had he done? He glanced down the street, his heart racing, as if the shadows themselves were closing in on him. Little did he know, his past wasn't as buried as he'd thought. Jamal Carter couldn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling in his modest one-bedroom apartment, heart pounding with a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. His mind was replaying every moment from the past year, the cold nights he'd spent on the streets, the gnawing hunger, the feeling of being invisible to the world. And then there was Emily. The memory of her, huddled in that thin, tattered blanket on the freezing sidewalk, was like a phantom haunting him. The way she had reached into her own meager cup to drop those few coins into his hand, the image wouldn't leave him alone. It wasn't just her kindness that haunted him, but the knowledge of how quickly their roles had reversed. 1 year later, Jamal was running a small but successful car detailing business, while Emily, where was she now? He knew he had to find her. That morning, Jamal made up his mind. He cancelled all his appointments and drove down to the last place he remembered seeing Emily, the underpass on 14th and Jefferson, where they had huddled together for warmth during that brutal January storm. But the underpass was empty now. A few crumpled sleeping bags, discarded wrappers, and the lingering smell of damp cardboard were all that remained. He asked around, other homeless people in the area, shop owners nearby, but no one seemed to know where she had gone. Jamal's search grew more desperate over the next week. He visited soup kitchens, shelters, parks. Every time he thought he'd found a lead, it fizzled out. His heart sank with each dead end, but he refused to give up. Emily had saved him when no one else did. He owed her. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Jamal was standing in line at the St. Luke's Community Kitchen, hoping someone might have seen her. The kitchen was a small, bustling place, with volunteers handing out steaming bowls of soup and plates of bread. His eyes scanned the faces in the crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of her tired but kind eyes, the familiar cascade of auburn hair streaked with gray. And then, just as he was about to leave, a voice stopped him in his tracks. Jamal. He turned, and there she was. Emily. But she was almost unrecognizable, thinner, paler, her clothes hanging off her like they belonged to someone else. Yet her eyes still held that same quiet strength, that same spark of compassion that had saved him. Emily, he cried, rushing to her, his throat tight with emotion. They embraced, standing in the middle of the crowded kitchen as the world bustled around them. For a moment it was like they were the only two people in the room. I've been looking for you everywhere, Jamal said, pulling back to study her face. How have you been? Where are you staying? Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. It's been rough, Jamal. After my husband passed, I lost the apartment. Then I got sick, and things just spiraled. I'm staying at the women's shelter on 9th Street now. They help me out when they can. Jamal felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the system, at the cruelty of it all. How could a woman like Emily, who had so little but still found it in her heart to give, be left to rot on the streets? He took a deep breath and made a decision on the spot. No, he said firmly. Not anymore. You helped me when I had nothing, Emily. It's my turn now. That evening, Jamal took Emily to a diner, an old-fashioned place with red vinyl booths and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. They sat for hours, talking, catching up. Emily was hesitant at first, her pride making her wary of accepting help. But Jamal wouldn't take no for an answer. The next day, he brought her a new coat, a pair of sturdy boots, and a duffel bag packed with essentials. He set her up in a small apartment he'd found through a friend in the real estate business, a modest place, but safe and warm, with a soft bed and a kitchen stocked with food. Emily cried when she saw it. I can't accept this, Jamal. It's too much. It's not enough, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me hope when I was at my lowest. Now it's my turn. Over the next few weeks, Jamal helped Emily get back on her feet. He connected her with a social worker who specialized in helping homeless women reintegrate into society. He paid for her medical checkups, made sure she had groceries, and even introduced her to his friend Marcus, who owned a small cafe and was looking for a new server. Emily was hesitant at first, but Jamal encouraged her every step of the way. And slowly, like a flower pushing through the cracks in the sidewalk, she began to bloom again. Her first day at the cafe was nerve-wracking, but Jamal showed up with flowers and sat in the corner, beaming with pride as she served coffee and pastries. Watching her smile at customers, taking orders, moving with a quiet grace, he felt an overwhelming sense of joy. He realized in that moment that sometimes the greatest redemption comes not from what we receive, but from what we give back. But just when it seemed like the storm had passed, life had one more twist in store. One night, as Jamal was driving home from his shop, his phone buzzed with a message that made his blood run cold. Jamal, it's Marcus. Something's happened at the cafe. You need to come down here. It's Emily. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as a wave of dread washed over him. Jamal's heart raced as he sped toward Marcus's cafe, the rain streaking down the windshield like tears on glass. The city blurred around him, neon signs, dark alleys, the endless stream of headlights and taillights. His fingers gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The message echoed in his mind. It's Emily. Something's happened. He skidded to a stop outside the cafe, the tires splashing through deep puddles. The place was a mess, red and blue lights flashing, police officers standing guard, yellow tape fluttering in the storm. The glass door of the cafe was shattered, shards littering the sidewalk like a broken dream. Jamal's stomach twisted in a knot as he rushed toward Marcus, who was standing off to the side, his face pale and eyes wide. Marcus. Where's Emily? What happened? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his voice trembling. It was a robbery. 2 guys came in, demanding cash. Emily was working the register. They had guns, Jamal. They hit her. Jamal felt the air leave his lungs, a hollow ache filling his chest. He pushed past the officers, not caring about the rules, not caring about anything except finding Emily. Inside the cafe, the scene was chaos, tables overturned, chairs smashed, a trail of footprints leading toward the back room. And there, near the counter, lying on the floor, was Emily. She was conscious, but barely. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her hands shook as paramedics worked to stabilize her. Jamal dropped to his knees beside her, his voice breaking. Emily, I'm here. I'm here, okay? Just hold on. You're gonna be all right. Her eyes fluttered open, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Jamal, you found me, again. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the rain that dripped from his hair. I'll always find you, Emily. Always. The next few hours were a blur, ambulances, sirens, questions from police officers. Jamal stayed by Emily's side as she was rushed to the hospital, holding her hand as if his grip alone could tether her to this world. The doctors moved swiftly, stitching her wound, checking for internal injuries. By some miracle, she had escaped serious harm, just a concussion and a few bruises. Jamal didn't leave her side. He sat in the hospital room, his hand resting gently on hers, watching her breathe, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. When she finally woke up, she turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved me again, Jamal." He shook his head, his own voice thick with emotion. "No, Emily. You saved me first. And I'll never forget that." In the days that followed, Jamal made a decision. He couldn't just help Emily once and walk away. He wanted to create something bigger, something lasting, a place where people like Emily, like him, could find a second chance. He poured his savings into opening a community center, the Second Chance Hub. It was a modest building, but inside, it was filled with warmth and hope. They offered job training, resume workshops, free meals, and a safe place to rest. Jamal hired people who had been through the same struggles, former homeless individuals, single mothers, veterans, and those who had once been invisible to society. And at the heart of it all was Emily. She became the soul of the center, mentoring women who had lost everything, showing them that kindness wasn't weakness but strength. She was the first face people saw when they walked through the door, her smile a beacon of hope. 1 year after the robbery, Jamal hosted a special event at the center, a celebration of its success and the lives it had touched. The room was packed, the air buzzing with laughter and stories of survival. People shared how they had found jobs, reunited with family, started school again. Jamal took the stage, looking out at the crowd, his eyes landing on Emily, who sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, tears glistening in her eyes. "I want to tell you all a story," Jamal began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A year ago, I was a man lost in the dark, begging for change on a street corner. I was invisible. But one person saw me, a woman who had nothing herself, yet gave me everything she could." He gestured toward Emily, and the room erupted in applause. She blushed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "That act of kindness changed my life. And it taught me something, no matter how little you think you have, you always have something to give. A smile. A hand. A dollar. A moment of your time. And when you give, you create ripples that spread further than you can imagine." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. "So today, I want to thank Emily. And I want to promise all of you, this place, this community, is just the beginning. Together, we're going to rewrite the story for everyone who's ever been told they're not enough." The applause was thunderous, but it was the look on Emily's face, pure, unfiltered gratitude, that Jamal would carry with him forever. That night, as the rain began to fall again, Jamal and Emily stood outside the center, watching the lights glow in the windows. "Funny how it all started with a few coins," Emily said softly. Jamal smiled, slipping his arm around her shoulder. "Yeah. And look what we built with them." They stood in the rain, letting it wash over them like a baptism, a promise of new beginnings. And in that quiet moment, they knew they had created something no storm could ever wash away. Together, they had found redemption, not in what they had, but in what they gave. And this time, they weren't invisible anymore.